Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Jamie, I'm the coordinator here at the center. If you haven't been to the center before, I have some flyers for some really great events coming up at the back. And you can also sign up to our listserv. We do a lot of stuff like this. This is one of the final events in our series in honor of Roxana Ng, who is the head here at the center. There are 3 more events in this series. We've got one coming up next week, one the week after, and then one in early April, and there's information about them all at the back. I recommend checking them out. They've all been really amazing. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan, who's going to talk about embodied writing and decolonized knowledge production. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. I studied at OCAD a number of years ago now. I now work at OCAD University, which is just down the street, but I haven't been back here for quite some time, and it's both really nice to be back and sort of strange. I also haven't delivered a kind of traditionally academic presentation in quite some time. So that's been an interesting process to revisit, and I'm feeling excited and a little tentative about my presentation today. So it's nice to see so many. There's some very old and familiar faces in the room. Old in the sense of people I've known for a long time, of course. So it's nice, and also some new faces. So thank you all for coming.
One of the very old has to speak up a little more loud.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you.
Let me continue to let me know if I need to speak more loudly. So I'd like first to acknowledge that we're here today on unceded First Nations territories. My thanks and respect to the traditional owners of this land, and also to the many Indigenous scholars that I've worked with and learned from over the years. It's also exciting that it's Indigenous Education Week, I believe, and Linda Smith is at the university this week, who's a very well-known and respected scholar in the area of Indigenous education. So I saw a poster in the elevator. Those would be events to check out, I would think, if people are interested. I'd also like to thank the Center for Women's Studies in Education, and Jamie in particular. I was quite tardy with a number of my materials, and she was very patient with me. And also for organizing this entire series in honor of Roxana. I've really appreciated the opportunity that this presentation has afforded me to revisit Roxana's scholarship and what she meant to me as my thesis supervisor, which she was when I was studying here at OCAD. As a scholar and also as my friend. I first read, so just to situate sort of my relationship with Roxana a little, I first read her work nearly 20 years ago. It's kind of hard to believe. I was in my first year at university at the time. And her work, as I'm sure did for many of you, had an enormous effect on my understanding of feminist anti-racism. At a particularly critical juncture for me in my education and my politicization. So I feel grateful to her for her lineage in that regard. I later moved to Toronto to study here at OCAD and felt very appreciative that she agreed to be my supervisor. And later, became a good friend. We had a lot of conversations over the years about embodiment, health, and healing, and what it means to bring our bodies into our academic and intellectual work. And so her work and her influence strongly has informed the presentation that I'll be delivering today. So at this stage, Roxana probably would have liked me to have told everyone to take deep breaths and get up and get moving. But I'm actually going to deliver this in a fairly traditional way. I will be playing an audio excerpt a little later on from a text that I'll be dealing with in the presentation. The author actually there's a CD recording of the author reading her own work, so it's kind of nice to be able to hear text actually presented in the voice of the author, so I'll be doing that a little later. And then I think there'll be plenty of time afterwards for discussion and questions, so I look forward to that as well. So I'd like to begin with a story. During my first semester of graduate school, I took a course on embodied learning with Roxana Ng. One of the course requirements was that we keep a journal. This may sound familiar to any of you who are also a student of hers. Comprised of both responses to the course readings and reflections upon our experience of the Qigong practice that was central to the course curriculum. In one of my final journal entries, I wrote that I would have liked a more explicit anti-racist theoretical framework through which to engage with course content. While my comment was intended to highlight the importance of politicizing knowledge production when learning about Indigenous health and healing systems, it also betrays the limitations of my perspective at the time. That is, the extent to which my understanding of anti-racism and critical pedagogy was located within the realm of an activist academic approach, which privileges the mind and intellect, often at the expense or erasure of our bodies and bodily knowledge. In her response, Roxana acknowledged my critique, but made a political assertion of her own. In the margins of my course paper, she wrote, in green ink, which may sound familiar to some of you, "I believe that profound shifts must come from self-reflection and interrogation, not just from intellectual understanding." While I agreed with her about the importance of self-reflection and interrogation, at the time I understood these as primarily intellectual activities, and I recall insisting to myself that we need theory and analysis if we're to do our politics properly. I later came to realize that Roxana was suggesting a different kind of reflection and interrogation, however, one that calls into the very question the foundations of knowledge production, calls into question the very foundations of knowledge production. It took several years of engagement with mindfulness meditation and a variety of other bodywork practices, which share among them an attentiveness to the different dimensions of bodily life, for me to fully appreciate the significance of Roxana's assertion that personal and social transformation are intertwined processes which cannot be accomplished through analysis alone. Through working with a chronic pain condition and holding this embodied process in conversation with the work of theorizing the body and knowledge production, I came to a deep awareness of how body and culture are fully imbricated, how history, in its many manifestations, lodges itself in the body. As I learned to attend to my body and expand the frameworks I was using to understand the nature of pain and bodily life in general, I also discovered that our epistemological locations matter a great deal. This notion of location and a concern with how we orient ourselves towards bodily knowledge and experience, and to what effect, became a key theme in my work, and it's one that I'll return to throughout this discussion. My paper today represents one aspect of my thesis research on the possibilities of embodied writing for decolonizing knowledge production. In my thesis, I examined autobiographical pain narratives to reveal how normative bodily relations to knowledge production and to text, and the practices of reading and writing that flow from these relations, reproduce medicalized understandings of pain in the body and serve to maintain the normative orders of Western academic knowledge production. In order to disrupt dominant, taken-for-granted ways of knowing about and through the body, I needed to reach outside of common Western research methods and cultivate an approach that would help me to suspend inherited habits of knowing, as feminist scholar Jackie Alexander puts it, and center the body within my writing and research. It was through mindfulness practice that I was able to cultivate a different way of knowing about the body, through the body, which allowed me to read and write the body differently than I had before. In this presentation, I'll discuss how phenomenology, really a phenomenologically informed sort of interpretive sociology, sort of more rightfully, and mindfulness meditation can be brought together to foster an embodied writing practice. In doing so, I'm suggesting that we turn our attention to how we imagine ourselves as bodily beings, writing about bodies and other social phenomena, although my focus is the body, so that we might learn something about the relationship between embodiment, difference, and knowledge production. After mapping out my approach, I'll discuss an excerpt from Lata Mani's autobiographical narrative of pain and disability, entitled Interleaves, to illustrate what I mean by embodied writing and to explore its implications for decolonizing. So that's the clip that I'll be playing. I begin with the understanding that writing is central to Western education, knowledge production, and social research methodologies. Writing is also a political activity. As Maori scholar Linda Smith reminds us, academic writing and its role in the generation of theory is never innocent. However, at the same time as it carries with it a legitimacy reflective of wider social histories of Western knowledge production, imperialism, and domination, writing can also represent a politicizing space through which to contest, reflect upon, and rewrite hegemonic narratives. While the significance of writing to social inquiry and the possibilities offered by non-traditional forms of writing have been well documented, the relationship between the body and our writing practices has been given less attention. Although feminist and disability studies scholarship in particular have moved to redress the mind-body split, characteristic of social science research, through an acknowledgement of the researcher as an experiencing subject. An examination of the ways in which writing is both a social and a bodily activity remains curiously absent. In the Phenomenology of Perception, Maurice Merleau-Ponty tells us it is through our embodied perception of the world that our understandings take shape. If writing is not merely a method of knowledge transmission, but a process of knowing more deeply, then our writing practices are also mediated by our embodiment. There's a tension here, however, for within the normative orders of Western academic knowledge production, we can also say that the inverse is true. Our textual practices simultaneously mediate our understandings of bodily life. This is to say that when we write something into being. The form this writing takes, thus rewrites an embodied relation to the world as it is represented in the text. This points to a dynamic relation between body and form, which can be traced through the embodied and narrative strategies we put to work in our writing and theorizing. As I suggested earlier, my interest in developing an embodied writing practice was motivated by a desire to animate the body within my writing and research, and to disrupt normative bodily relations to knowledge production. This desire for me acquired a kind of critical urgency when I developed a physical impairment during my graduate studies that profoundly affected my ability to produce written text and participate in academic knowledge production. As Roxana Ng has noted, our bodies are an integral but taken for granted aspect of our intellectual work. For me, the reciprocal relationship between my body and my scholarly work only became truly clear to me when I suddenly found that I could not write and was unable to participate in the intellectual work of the university. Disability and its intervention into my experience of sort of typical bodily relations to writing, as if there's any typical relation to writing, but academic work often likes to pretend that there is. Thus shaped my interest in exploring how an embodied writing practice can intervene in those dominant epistemological practices which serve to secure the authority of particular bodies of knowledge and recognize only particular bodies as knowledgeable. My commitment to embodied writing, particularly when involved myself, initially remained quite intellectual insofar as I didn't know how to know through any other means. Mindfulness practice, however, helped me cultivate a different way of knowing about the body, through the body, my body. And this was very important, that it be my body, because it allowed me to reach outside an objectified relation to embodiment and write the body's subjectivity. I began to experience my body, and in particular the pain I was living with, quite differently. My sensory experience became more nuanced, and the boundaries of my perception of my embodiment more expansive. I became at once more conscious of my sensory experience, and because I was more aware of the variability and changeability of this experience, less invested in it and its possible meaning or significance. Pain became part of a much broader set of sensory experiences than it had been for me in the past. Knowing that I could experience my body differently was a profound confirmation that the body is indeed socially produced. While I had previously been committed to this perspective, I came to understand this at the level of bodily experience, itself an interpretive process, and not solely as an intellectual interest in social theories of embodiment. Because I was very well grounded in the literature, sort of prior to this, and alongside it. During this time, I also began to explore the potential for embodied writing to support a project of decolonizing knowledge production. So this was a parallel interest that, sort of thus far in my studies, I had been kind of grappling to reconcile. And as I began to do this work around embodied learning, I found ways to bring those two sort of, interests and commitments together. Colonial histories continue to shape the social organization of knowledge. Colonialism is not just something that occurred in the past, but is part of an ongoing social and geopolitical formations that structure discourse in the present. Decolonization, then, is not only about the return of land to Indigenous peoples, though this too is very important, but is also about interrogating those knowledge systems founded upon colonial ideologies and the practices of exclusion that flow from them. Within this context, I became interested in how forms of dualistic thinking prohibit more integrative approaches to knowledge production, and also in tracing the ways that these systems of dualistic thinking inflect writing as a site of epistemological practice. I returned around this time to Roxana's assertion, if you'll recall my opening narrative, that if critical reflection is to be put to the service of social transformation, then it must be an embodied activity. In her scholarly work on embodied pedagogy, or embodied learning, Roxana argues that oppressive social relations are upheld by the division between the mind, intellect, and body spirit that is foundational to Western education and knowledge production. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this aspect of her work. She argues that this leads to a disjuncture between analysis and practice, or ways of being in the world. Even, or perhaps especially, critical education, with its explicit social justice agenda, tends to reproduce this disjuncture through its emphasis on critical thinking at the expense of embodied or spiritual understanding. Roxana's model of embodied pedagogy seeks to redress this disjuncture through an integrative practice that highlights Eastern health and meditation practices in the classroom as a way of disrupting the mind-body split and facilitating students' capacity for embodied self-reflection and critical insight. Jackie Alexander similarly charts a relationship between colonization and systems of dualistic thinking, arguing that the work of decolonization requires a critically engaged, integrative approach that bridges the secular and the spiritual and is premised on a dynamic relation between radical self-determination and collective interdependence. Central to the work of decolonization, then, is the notion of practice and the possibility offered by integrative work that disrupts those hierarchical dualisms that are foundational to Western social thought. I'm sure these are all very familiar to us: mind, body, male, female, reason, affect, nature, culture, and so on. There's lots of them. Epistemologically, Roxana's approach is instructive because it allows for knowledge production about the body to take place through the body, thereby displacing the primacy of objectivist scientific ways of knowing. Importantly, it also acts as a critical intervention into Western philosophies of the body by providing a set of alternative theories and practices of the body. In doing so, this approach not only reveals that the body is always already a space of interpretation, I'm drawing on Butler here, but also locates our social and cultural understandings of the body and relationships to our bodies within wider histories of colonial knowledge production, in terms of what counts as knowledge and credible knowledge. So I'm going to shift gears a little here towards a more sort of methodological discussion before I deal with the text. Philosopher Anne-Marie Mall suggests that we critically reflect upon how bodies are done through an analysis of those material practices that shape the experience and interpretation of bodily life. So she was dealing with medical practices, but I think it's applicable to other types of bodily practice. Mall warns of the risk involved in treating bodies as solely a space of interpretation and meaning-making, as kind of postmodern theories of the body have tended to do, suggesting that, quote, the body's physical reality is still left out. It is yet again an unmarked category, end quote. Methodologically, this insistence upon the intersections between those material and discursive boundaries shaping bodily life is important when in theorizing embodied experiences such as pain and disability, because it thoroughly denaturalizes any embodied relation, while at the same time allows for the recognition that theorizing has consequences that must be lived with. Furthermore, Mall asserts, quote, attending to enactment rather than knowledge has an important effect. What we think of as a single object may appear to be more than one, end quote. It is this kind of multiplicity and complexity that I sought to uncover regarding pain in the body, as a strategy for dedisciplining the ways we experience and narrate our experiences of pain. I want now to take up Mull's methodological proposal to explore the possibilities of embodied writing practices that reveal the multiplicity, intersubjectivity, and sociality of bodily pain and bodily life. Mindfulness meditation, for me, offers one way of doing the body, such that knowledge can be produced through the body and bodily diversity. Mindfulness meditation is a central practice within Buddhism. So I'm going to map out meditation, very, very broad strokes. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, and make some connections between phenomenology and meditation. Mindfulness meditation is a central practice within Buddhism. While the term meditation actually refers to a variety of techniques developed over centuries, including different forms of yoga and sitting meditation, these practices share among them the aim of cultivating embodied awareness in the present moment. Most simply put, mindfulness meditation is about, quote, paying attention without judgment. The most common means of mindfulness meditation involve using a stable and relaxed seated posture and breath work to ground us in our bodies, such that we can be more aware of what we are feeling and experiencing. In this way, the practice of mindfulness creates a relationship of witnessing oneself and one's body, such that it fosters greater reflective awareness. While this practice of paying attention can be developed through dedicated meditation time, mindfulness can also be taken into daily life through the cultivation of attentiveness to common activities such as walking, talking with others, and writing. Mindfulness fosters a kind of attentiveness that aims to interrupt those cognitive thought patterns that lead us to narrate our experiences as we experience them. These storylines, as they're often called, are forms of received knowledge, acquired through our individual and social histories. Mindfulness practice asks that we suspend what we think we know, such that we can experience our bodies and ourselves more fully and deeply. Mindfulness also helps to highlight the notion of impermanence, the idea that no particular state is permanent because the world is constantly changing, through heightened awareness of our feelings and sensations. With this heightened awareness, we can clearly perceive the fluidity and variability of embodied experiences. This is particularly helpful when working with feelings or sensations that are generally understood to be troublesome or undesirable, such as pain. I found the practice of mindfulness meditation to be consistent with phenomenology through the shared emphasis on reflection, embodied awareness, and openness between self and other. And I actually started to draw these connections because it was during my graduate studies. I was studying phenomenology and these texts through my coursework, and also doing this mindfulness work at the same time. And these connections became sort of very resonant to me through the intersection of these practices. Larry Rosenberg, a Buddhist scholar and teacher based in the United States, describes mindfulness as a way of being intimate with the world as we experience our world. When we are mindful, he suggests, the distinctions we tend to create between self and other can dissolve or become more discrete. Similarly, reflection in the phenomenological tradition is a way of, quote, bringing into nearness that which tends to be obscure, that which tends to evade the intelligibility of our natural attitude of everyday life, end quote. Mindfulness and phenomenology also share a commitment to openness of both the body and thought processes. They are not concerned with reflection as a form of truth-telling, but rather with the cultivation of a reflexive practice that allows for sustained embodied engagement with and through the world. In this sense, mindfulness can help to achieve phenomenology's hope for cultivating understanding through the recognition of the inseparability between subject and object, self and other. Lata Mani's 2001 memoir, Interleaves, provides a good illustration of how mindfulness meditation can shape an embodied writing practice and thus act as an intervention into those normative writing conventions which position the body as subordinate to, and in the case of disabled bodies, interfering with, the privileged work of the intellect. First, though, a little background about the author in this text. Lata Mani is a scholar, poet, and cultural critic. Formerly a professor at the University of California, Davis, Lata Mani sustained a head injury as a result of a major car accident. In her own words, Interleaves, quote, is about an individual's journey through the social landscapes of our time, through the ways in which society constructs wellness, illness, success, failure, worth, worthlessness, as these are experienced by one woman attempting to live consciously through the trials and tribulations of brain injury. The social construction of illness meant that the rupture brought about by a physical disability and a medical emergency became also an existential crisis, one in which the broader questions of life and death, pain and suffering, belonging and outsiderness had to be confronted every day, and, at times, with every breath. End quote. The book is divided into two parts. Part 1, entitled The Journey, consists of a series of ruminations, as the author calls them, on living with disability and chronic illness. Part 2, entitled Contemplations, is a series of reflections on 7 spiritual principles that the author drew upon as she learned to live through disability, pain, and suffering. The book blends narrative, critical reflection, and poetry, and makes use of a variety of different narrative and stylistic devices throughout. Mani's book is also available as an audio CD, and this format reflects the medium through which the book was written, the spoken word. So it's not just that it's an audio recording of the book, the way sort of books on tape can be, and where they're often read by someone else. In this case, the author actually, because her cognition at that time in her therapeutic process was occurring through hearing, so she couldn't write and work sort of analytically in the ways that she was accustomed to as a scholar. And so she orally produced the text and then had it transcribed. So I have a copy of the CD. So as a result, so this affected the narrative structure of the book. The book is quite fluid. It's comprised of relatively short and overlapping chapters, which, when taken together, explore many different aspects of the social location of disability. But they don't seek to build a comprehensive argument. Instead of offering traceable analytic trajectories or conclusions to anchor the various chapters, as we might expect in a conventional academic work, Mani shares with readers what she has learned from her experience of disability. So it's quite a sort of pedagogical text in many ways. These reflections, though, are themselves provisional because they're grounded in another embodied practice of knowledge production, that of meditation and breath work. So I now want to examine how the body and pain is being done and kind of accomplished in the text, Interleaves, and how in particular it's accomplished through an embodied relationship to knowledge production as it is revealed within the text. The body is something we do is highlighted through the emphasis on reflections which have emerged through the embodied practice of meditation. In this sense, key meditation practices such as conscious breath work, observation without evaluation and attachment, and being present in the moment can also be understood methodologically. The text moves between description and discussion, but significantly, the author returns the reader again and again to the present, to the embodied moment of reflection and the open possibilities of that reflexive space. This presents quite a different intention and temporality than the progressive movement of modernist Western practices of knowledge production, which tend to gain authority through coherent, forward-facing narratives and theorizing. In contrast, this text uses a kind of reflective, intersubjective present as a space to consider the workings and the sociality of the body, pain, and disability. So while Lata Mani writes of the body and of her body throughout the text, she consistently writes this body knowledge through her embodied relation to that knowledge, achieved through meditation practice, and also with the reflexive sense that it could also be otherwise. So I'm going to show you what I mean. This is drawn from a chapter entitled Pain. Hopefully I've got it cued properly.
Pain throbs. Pain shreds.
Can you hear it?
Pain darts. Pain weaves sly patterns across the length and breadth of the body. Pain stabs. Pain pulses. Pain plummets the body into a vortex unknown and at times fearful. Pain nags. Chronic pain drones repetitiously, monotonously, ad nauseum. Pain flays the surface of the skin, turning it almost translucent with frailty. Pain makes one so weak that the whole world is experienced through its omnipresent filter. Pain drains everything into its core. Pain can be as focused as the point of a pinhead, or as dispersed as one's consciousness. And if suffered long enough, the pinpoint can seem to grow and swallow one's entire physical being. Pain can be as hard as steel or as soft as a ripe pear. Pain shudders. Pain shivers. Yet, to speak of pain like this is to suggest that it is an entity, a thing, when it is, in fact, something very difficult to grasp and hold. For when one does not resist pain, so it pools, swirls, finds a crevice in the body in which to stay put. Pain is revealed as a diaphanous energy, permeable, dissolvable, transformable by breath. Pain, it turns out, is not an ice floe that must be hacked away, but a little pocket of stuck energy that can be released by softening, loosening, relaxing, by conscious breathing.
So in this passage, knowledge about the body is certainly being produced. But this knowledge, much like embodied life itself, is represented as active, contradictory, and suggestive of other possibilities and experiences. This contingency is most clearly revealed through the break in the narrative and the narrative positioning of pain's description. Whereas the section began with a direct rendering of pain as an embodied phenomenon, the paragraph breaks in narrative, and you can't see the paragraph breaks, but I think she paused, she probably captured it. The paragraph breaks in the narrative perspective shifts to a reflexive space, perhaps mirroring the process of mindfully working with pain as an embodied experience. While the dominant approach to pain understands it as negation and something to manage, suppress, and eliminate, something to be, quote, hacked away, Mani's description suggests that through meditation or, quote, conscious breathing, pain can also be something else. Pain is thus represented as a relationship between people and their bodies, and as such is an intersubjective phenomenon, a social activity mediated by the discourses, practices, and other meaning-making devices available to us. This is one way that bodies are done. Mani also offers us her body work with breath and meditation, and in so doing contests medical discourses which seek to categorize, measure, and manage pain. These are two more ways that bodies are done. Mani thereby writes the complexity, vulnerability, and social locatedness of embodied life into her narrative and into her narrative practice, suggesting that one way of contesting those epistemological boundaries which represent bodily pain as somehow outside the social, is to shift the very grounds of our theoretical and methodological approaches. And here are many more ways that bodies can be done. To feel pain, to live with pain, to be in pain, is almost certainly accompanied by the desire to not be in pain in this world. I don't wish to question or negate that desire, even while I would like to unsettle it. What I do desire is that we pay attention to how the body and pain is being accomplished, and what this can tell us about bodily norms and difference, and the boundaries of knowledge production about and of the body. While this relation to pain as a desired and potential absence is present in Mani's narrative above, I read this as a present-absent dialectic that exists among several different relations to bodily pain. In the text, pain is felt, pain is narrated, pain is written, it is worded, pain is worked with, it is held, and it is released. Pain is theorized, and pain is imagined. Perhaps most significantly, pain is both part of the body and beyond it. Pain, when attended to with mindfulness, is a space of shifting, relational encounters with oneself and others. Pain will always exceed its narration. Mani's narrative also reveals the contingency and indeterminacy of knowledge production about pain in the body. Just as there were multiple relations to pain in the narrative, so too were there multiple bodies. Her body writing, her body doing a mindfulness exercise, her body telling a story and describing pain, to name a few. In attending to how the body is accomplished through different narrative practices, interpretive devices, and approaches to language, we can clearly appreciate the multiplicity of the body. In grounding her narrative in an embodied practice that reaches beyond dominant relations to both embodiment and writing, Lata Mani's narrative disrupts the singular authority of medicalized Western knowledge production about pain in the body. In doing so, her embodied narrative practice opens up the possibility of cultivating bodily knowledge that is also resistant knowledge. In reorienting ourselves to our bodily knowledge, mindfulness meditation offers the possibility of generating not simply new knowledge or critique, but importantly, as Roxana would have asked of us, new ways of being in the world. Drawing together mindfulness meditation, phenomenology, and embodied pedagogies, an embodied writing practice can help to decolonize the tendency towards dualistic thinking that is characteristic of Western social thought, and thus shift the very grounds of our critique such that the meaning and experiences of embodied phenomena such as pain and disability can be reimagined. Indeed, when taken up in the service of social transformation, I believe embodied writing can support a project of decolonizing insofar as it intervenes in those academic conventions which discipline our scholarly and political practices such that colonial discourses of Western modernity retain their grip on our imaginations and our theorizing. Bringing mindfulness together with writing as an embodied practice is suggestive of liberatory possibility then, insofar as it summons marginalized knowledge and experience and opens up our writing and the stories we tell to allow for the presence of embodied and textual difference. Thank you.